Well, thank you all for being here. My name is Arden Hart. I am the head of production over at the Live Network on YouTube, a network of call-in shows where all of our hosts try to approach conversations with the lens of secular humanism and skepticism. I also host my own show on the network, the Transatlantic Call-In Show, where my hosts, who are always other trans people and myself, take calls from the public about anything and everything trans-related. I've been involved in this space, the sort of trans activist space, both on the ground and online for several years now. And I've spent more time defending my positions than most people ever will, and talked to more trans people in and out of activism than most people ever will. And that's why I'm here to talk to you guys today about transphobia in the secular movement. To be clear, in my view, when we're talking about someone or something being transphobic or homophobic or bigoted, it isn't about accusing someone of a thought crime that they have to atone for or anything like that. If I have to say what you've said is transphobic or what you've done is transphobic, I'm trying to open a door to help you reflect on how your thoughts or actions may be harming one of the most marginalized communities in the US right now. Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Jerry Coyne, and others, unfortunately, have been highly influential to many of us in secular spaces. But the arguments and talking points they've been putting forward on this issue are not only straw men of what trans people are actually asking for from society, in my view, but if you burn down those straw men and sift through the ashes, I think what you'll find are the trappings of Christian nationalism. A move backward towards rigid, Eurocentric gender roles. I'm going to do my best here to walk you through some of the most common arguments that I see put forward by these men and their acolytes, and to explain why they're wrong on logical and scientific grounds. But then I want you to kind of completely disregard most of that part of the conversation. This talk may be titled A Guidebook to Confronting Transphobia and Secular Movement, but what it really is to me is a guide towards a place of realigned priorities. To be able to distinguish between who our allies are and are not in the fight against Christian nationalism. And to hopefully convince you that the relentless assault on trans lives does nothing for robust debate, or truth, or skepticism, does nothing to protect the lives of women and girls, or fairness in sport, or any of the things that it often purports to do. What it does is cede ground completely to the very people who want to see women deny their ability to make decisions about their own bodies. It cedes ground and legitimacy to the people who currently are covering up for Jeffrey Epstein, a known trafficker of women and girls, and frames them as defenders of women and girls. But worst of all, it normalizes the dehumanization of our neighbors, coworkers, families, and friends. So let's take a look at what we're up against. So section 1, the first kind of category of arguments that I hear a lot is that sex is binary. Dawkins said in the Sunday Times several years ago, and as recently as like 2 weeks ago on his podcast, that race is very much a spectrum, but sex, on the other hand, is damn binary. Jerry Coyne, in an article, said that under his definition of sex, nearly all individuals fit into a biological sex binary. I find these particular quotes funny, because if you know what a binary is, you know that for something to be pretty damn binary, or nearly binary, demonstrates that it is not in fact a true binary. This is what is called a binary distribution, or a graph where the majority of points occur along 2 positions, but not exclusively. Trans people, trans activists, and the trans-inclusive understanding of biological sex isn't confused about the near 99% trend with which people tend to be sorted into these standard biological categories. Our model both captures that fact and makes room for the fact that humans, a social species, might, as a result of these exceptions to the rule, reject the expectations put upon them. In my experience, this conversation typically takes place on about 4 levels. The first of these is the chromosomal argument. That is, men are males, which have XY chromosomes, and women are females that have XX chromosomes. This argument is incredibly flawed for several reasons, but the most glaring of which is that nobody is walking around with chromosomal vision, and we seem to be able to figure out, largely, what's going on just fine. And nobody's got a karyotype on hand either. But even if we were to disregard trans people entirely, there are people who were born girls, lived their whole lives as women, got married, got pregnant, gave birth, but had XY chromosomes the whole time. There are men, conversely, who have fully functional standard male genitalia and lived their whole lives as men, but in fact had XX chromosomes the whole time. That is to say, relying on chromosomes still leaves you in a world where men are getting pregnant and where women have penises. It hasn't gotten you out of the problem that they love to mention. The second level to this argument is the gamete argument. So this is the notion that there are only two gamete types, the small mobile gamete, or the sperm, and the large immobile gamete, or the eggs. Jerry Point points out later in the article I quoted at the beginning of this section that no individual makes gametes other than sperm or eggs, and no individual makes none or more than one of these. But he fails to acknowledge that some people have the organs which produce these gametes removed, or there are some times where they just never produce the gametes to begin with. So it's not in fact the presence of gametes themselves that makes someone male or female. And so it gets pushed back to level 3, what I like to call the gamete potential argument. Point has used this in a different article of his where he has said that males are those with bodies designed to make sperm, and females are those with bodies designed to make eggs. Kathleen Stock, a notorious career anti-trans activist from the UK, warmly welcomed on Richard Dawkins' podcast, said that females are individuals, quote, on a developmental pathway toward the production of large gametes. So designed and on the pathway. So now we're not talking about what you are or what you were, but rather what you would have been if reality didn't happen to you. These arguments aren't biology, they are prophecy. A prophecy that no matter what you're born with or where you end up, even if after every other identifiable factor that could ostensibly make you male or female is removed, still some essence remains. Finally, at level 4 is when they've clearly given up. They say something like this from Jerry Point. Quote, genuine intersexes don't challenge the statement that sex is binary. They aren't classifiable as male or female, but nor do they constitute a third sex. Did you see that? The goalpost just moved in real time. To disprove a binary, I don't need to establish a third category. I need to establish that there are more than 2 possible outcomes. As I discussed, there are more many. You don't just get to disregard exceptions to a universal statement you made when this is inconvenient to you. But now we're at the point where you can throw out all of this information because you can do the song and dance. You can do the work to prove that sex isn't binary, that it's more complicated than they want you to believe. But at the end of the day, they've revealed they don't care about the truth on this topic. Because if every time your definition of binary gets challenged, you move the goalpost to protect the status of said binary, you aren't defending truth, you aren't defending some biological fact. You're protecting a narrative, a very political narrative that is being used to subjugate women and queer people today. To these men, this conversation is nothing more than a philosophical abstraction. They fail to address the massive political, policy, and social implications that follow from this kind of misinformation. Because how do you expect to enforce a bathroom ban if we're going to start protecting spaces according to this flawed notion of a biological sex binary? Are we getting genital inspections to access the bathroom now? Or papers, please? Or is it more likely the case that we are now in the era of vigilante gender policing? If you paid attention to the news, especially since the election, there have been multiple cases across several states where there are women who are gender non-conforming getting accosted in the bathroom by police or other civilians and being told to leave. J.K. Rowling has explicitly told her followers to photograph and disseminate photos of alleged men they find in women's bathrooms. That should scare you. And we've seen it in the news, as we mentioned. The ceaseless debate about whether trans women are ontologically, in fact, women, or whether trans men are really men is a pathetic, stupid, and irrelevant distraction from what we know, which is that the evidence overwhelmingly supports that trans people benefit from having access to gender-affirming care. We benefit from documents that affirm our gender and protect our privacy when we're going through the airport or handing our ID to anyone. We know that forcing trans people to use spaces like bathrooms that align with our assigned sex both forcibly outs us and puts us at demonstrable risk of violence. Worse yet, women and children en masse are far more likely to be subjected to violence by someone they know personally, or as the news seems to be indicating, our president, than a trans woman taking a piss in the stall next to her. Section 2, this is about the notion of trans people or gender identity as a cult or a trend or a religion. So Sam Harris has said, many Americans reject the new metaphysics and even the new biology mandated by trans activists and the institutions they have successfully bullied and captured. He's even stated that if you find the statements transphobic, that you are part of the problem. Well, I guess that makes you part of the problem.
Yeah.
These statements are clearly rooted in prejudice. Again, the trans-inclusive understanding of biology doesn't deny anything of our previous understanding. And exactly what institutions have we captured? Universities are deleting our records in sports. Hospitals are denying us treatment for fear of being prosecuted. Real shit job we're doing with all these institutions we allegedly captured. But focusing in on this notion that trans people are developing some new framework with which to interpret reality. We hear this argument pretty frequently on my call-in show packets. The core of the claim seems to be that when someone identifies as trans, because you can't prove it, you don't have the access to the contents of their mind to know that they're really, totally, absolutely, surely trans, that the claim is functionally identical to a religious belief. But this analogy falls apart pretty quickly when you look closer. When someone claims that they have a relationship with God, they're making a claim about external reality. They're making a claim that not just that God exists, but that specifically a God exists who you can have a personal relationship with, and in many American evangelical contexts, also endorses slavery and genocide. These are big claims about the nature of reality itself. But when a trans person says they're a woman or a man or non-binary, they're not making a claim about the external universe. They're not claiming to be identical to cisgender men and women. It's a claim about their internal experience and sense of identity. If Harris's brand of skepticism were consistently applied, you become the most unbearable person to talk to in any social setting. Imagine if any time your friend mentioned their internal state, you demanded proof of that internal state. Like, I'm gay. Oh, really? You're gay? Kiss every man in this room. I'm hungry. Oh, really? I just bought you 3 extra large pizzas. Eat them all or you're lying. You could go on with the examples of the ways that our internal state can always just accept what people are telling us their internal state is. Clearly, it's absurd. We rely on people's honest reporting their internal states every day without calling it a religious belief. Demanding external proof for internal experiences doesn't make you skeptical, and especially not when this is a standard that you're failing to apply evenly across all similar experiences. It just makes you annoying. Let's take the implied fear here seriously for a moment. Maybe someone is lying about their internal state so that they can do harm to someone else. The answer for this is simple. If someone lies about anything to commit harm like sexual assault, the issue isn't trans identities. It's our society's broader inability to address effectively and prevent and report to sexual assault. It's rape culture. Blaming trans people doesn't solve. It distracts from addressing the real problems to these harms in the most efficient way possible. It's a direct violation of our freedoms to assert that all trans people are guilty by association to these hypothetical potential assailants. Another part of Harris's claim is the supposed drastic increase in the amount of people identifying as transgender. While I haven't heard him specifically cite this number, a lot of people who are making a similar argument will cite a 4,000% increase in referrals to a gender clinic in the UK. When you hear dramatic statistics like that, it's really important to ask for context. An increase from what to what? Because if I started a YouTube channel today and told one of you to subscribe, and then came back next year to report on my very impressive 4,000% increase in subscribers, you'd be pretty disappointed when you realize I had 41 subscribers. Similarly, Harris suggests that because trans activists have passionate supporters who share beliefs in this regard, that it resembles a religious cult. But if simply gathering together over shared beliefs constitutes a cult, where does that logic end? Over on the line, we have thousands of live viewers on certain shows regularly, hundreds of thousands over the course of a month or however much time. Is this audience a cult too? What about all of you? How many times have we all been told that atheism is a religion just because we congregate over shared ideas and shared values? We could think about this academically, where religion, typically involves organized worship, rituals, usually supernatural beliefs or moral systems based on some sort of divine edict. Trans activism, by contrast, has none of them. We see basic human rights, social recognition, grounded in real-world issues like dignity and healthcare, housing, employment, protections from legal discrimination, not supernatural decrees. Section 3 is about trans inclusion in sports. So kind of expanding on some of the sort of consequences of the things they were talking about earlier. All three, Dawkins, Harris, and Point, have firmly planted their flag on this hill. Sam says people won't nod along in approval of the man who pummels a woman in the Olympic boxing ring. While Dawkins claims our biological sex causes trans women to tower over female competitors, break records. Surely we push them to the ground and steal their lunch money too. First off, their arguments lean heavily on the stereotype of pro athletes, especially those assigned male at birth, as huge, muscular, and presumably hairy giants. They conveniently ignore that most anti-trans legislation thus far targets children, isolating young people from sometimes the only one in their entire school, and in one instance, one of the only ones in her entire state from participating with their peers. According to the Olympic Charter itself, access to free participation in sports is a human right. But Iman Khalif, the Olympic boxer that Harris is referencing, was never shown to be assigned male at birth. Her competitor in the infamous match where she gave up and ceded the round to Iman, apologized that her forfeiting caused such a massive stir. But the careless accusations of men like this have now had the International Olympic Committee demand a sex test for Iman to compete in the future. Because onlookers think she's too strong to be a woman, I guess. Or if we look at Leah Thomas, the University of Pennsylvania swimmer Dawkins loves to reference her shattering records. And I mean, that's sort of true. She did break a record, not the record, one for her specific local division, not any NCAA records for swimming. But I find it so ridiculous that Dawkins, Harris, and Point want to completely disregard outliers that break their universal statements when it comes to biological sex, yet rest their entire arguments against trans athletes on these few cases of trans people who have the audacity to not suck at sports. These arguments wouldn't even tie with Riley Gaines for fifth place. There's an unreasonable, selectively enforced standard being placed exclusively on trans people here, and it's deeply unfair. You can quickly see how the simplistic, rigid view of biological sex collapses in practice. But what bothers me most isn't that they're bad faith arguments, and they are bad faith arguments. It's that they use women's safety as, in fairness, as a smokescreen to reintroduce rigid gender roles and expectations enforced by policy and law. Yet they never talk about any of the issues that female athletes actually face. How about the massive disparities in research between male and female athletes? How about the massive disparities in funding and pay for male and female athletes? I don't know if y'all saw the WNBA coming out with Pay Us What You Owe Us shirts just the other day. Why not talk about the predatory doctors and specialists that we know exist, like Larry Nassar? Rather than protecting women and girls from someone like them, they're now enabling politicians to enforce genital inspections to prove that you are in fact the sex that you say you are. The entire foundation of this concept rests on the sexist notion of the perceived superiority of men. But once again, the biological essentialist framing has failed at what its stated goals are of protecting women and ensuring fairness. Instead, it posits blanket bans on an entire class of people who may not all even necessarily have the traits that could render their performance unfair as a solution, which ultimately restricts all of the lives and freedom of everyone who sports. Okay. Section 4, we are going really fast. We're gonna do a long Q&A session. Last section is on trans kids. So trans kids are not being rushed into transition at any stage. Young lesbians aren't being turned into boys because they play with trucks, or gay boys into girls because they like the Spice Girls a little too hard. To address this claim of the mass mutilation of children, the Journal of the American Medical Association recently released 2 studies on the rate of access to healthcare for trans minors. They used a database of insurance claims to do this, so not only did they have a massive sample size, but these are the trans people in our country who have the greatest degree of access to care. They are fully insured. The first study, tracking rates of puberty blockers, found that in a sample of 5 million adolescents, the rate of puberty blockers for patients assigned a female at birth was 0.02% and 0.01% for assigned male patients. The second study they released tracked the rate of surgery in over 1 year in a sample of 22 million adolescents. For adolescents aged 15 to 17, the rate of surgery was 0.005%. And for kids 13 to 14, it was 0.0001%. When the study accounted for all surgeries that could ostensibly be considered gender-affirming care, including for non-trans kids, out of 156 or 151 surgeries, 146 of them were cisgender males getting gynecomastia breast reduction surgery, meaning 6 cases at most of trans minors in that 22 million sample getting surgery. Any trans person who's had surgery can tell you that it's not easy to get. Each surgeon has their own requirements and restrictions. We usually need a letter from a doctor and a counselor to prove that this is going to benefit us. Often we need to be on hormones for multiple years first, and that's even if a cis person could walk in and get that same surgery, get approved for it that day. We need all of this extra stuff to get it. And that's for adults, meaning that these kids who got these procedures had to be in one of 3 scenarios. Their doctor was negligent, their parents lied, or the very obvious answer, they had extenuating circumstances that their providers believed warranted a faster timeline. So I know that was really data dense. I have just a little bit more to get through, and then you can tune back in, because I'm sure your eyes are blazing for it. The entire anti-trans movement has also really loved the CAS review out of the UK, a report commissioned by the UK government to evaluate the efficacy of gender-affirming care for minors. They determined, after dismissing lots of data, including some multi-year follow-up studies, that the evidence was insufficient. That's often convenient. Yet nowhere in the CAS review do they detail actual harm sustained from this care when it's used within the appropriate guidelines. There are many appeals to the unknown, potential for regret and detransition, but instead they act as though trans care is uniquely unevidenced. When in reality, many of our modern medical interventions have low quality evidence by the standard for many factors. Namely, that we try to conduct ethical research in this country, and conducting ethical, long-term follow-up research on children is particularly difficult and expensive. But it's important to note that to the extent regret even exists within the trans community, it's actually rare. Sources say anywhere from 0.4% to 3%. But moreover, for every trans person who sincerely regrets transition, there are many more who sincerely regret the opportunity, not having the opportunity to have transition sooner. Ask any trans person you know, if you have the knowledge, if you have the family environment to do it, would you have started transition sooner? The answer, most of the time, would be a resounding yes. But we can disregard all of that too, because the real problem here is if we're going to be logically consistent, to what extent are we now going to be insulating our children from potential harm? Why are we not hearing these men talk about marijuana or alcohol or vaping? What about ballet or tackle football, a sport still widely revered in the South, even for high schoolers, despite the rates of concussions that happen? Nothing in life is without risk, including medicine, and none of it is free from the potential for regret. So, wow, we are speeding through. I'm so sorry, guys. I have a conclusion here for you. Before I really shoot my apprentice spiel, I want to talk to you all a little bit about my personal life, especially with regard to children and the fear of detransition. I started my transition initially at 14 years old. My mom walked in on me one night and asked me what was wrong. I was sobbing, and I told her, "Mom, I think I'm a girl." Despite having no idea what that meant, she leapt into superhero mode and got me a therapist and was unwaveringly by my side as she is to this day. However, now I'm going to bring you back down. However, I would go on to sustain immense levels of harassment from my peers. We were kicked out of our church. I got threats of violence almost daily for a period of time. My biological father basically stopped being involved in my life entirely. I had to meet with a fertility preservation specialist and an endocrinologist at the time in order to access treatment. And that was the standard at the time. It's no longer the standard, nor should it be, in my opinion. I felt like a freak and an outcast at every step of the way. Eventually, at the peak of feeling very isolated and unlovable, I asked myself, would it be better to go back to being a boy? I knew I'd be miserable, but if I could suppress my true self, I could have people back in my life. And I said yes to that question. At 17, I started detransition, and I think I was supported excessively through that process. Almost all of the peers who stopped talking to me suddenly wanted to talk to me again. The ones who called me slurs in the lunchroom suddenly treated me like I was every other kid. That experience took me years of my life to work through. Years of agony and self-loathing. I was hospitalized for suicidality on multiple occasions. It was clear to me that society preferred one version of me, and that was the version that was killing me. It wasn't until I was 22 years old that I finally started to ask myself if forcing myself to perform manhood to get dignity from society was really worth my time. What I learned is that the only irreversible damage I sustained was forcing myself to go through male puberty to be sure for everyone else's sake. The only irreversible damage I sustained was being taught that in order to avoid abuse in society, I had to crush myself down into a shell of a person to hide that I was trans, and that's a fact that I am deeply proud of today. When I look back at pictures of myself as a little girl, my heart aches because I know what she's going through. And I know what she's about to go through.
You are so brave.
I know the layers of expectation were building around me like a house of cards that would one day crumble and rock the foundation of how I was taught to see the world. It was made clear to me long before Donald Trump or the GOP became obsessed with trans people that they would gladly spend the time and money drafting bills, debating them on the House floor, and passing them to deny me the ability to interact with my peers instead of doing anything to help working class Americans. I don't want any kid, or anyone for that matter, to have to go through what I went through. I want them to access the evidence-based guidelines, like the ones in the gender-affirming care model, that ensure that they have the time and the freedom to figure out exactly what they want out of their life. To give them the time without risking the potentially irreversible changes of our natural. And to know that whatever outcome they should choose, that the people around them will support and love them through it, because that's what the adults in your life are supposed to do. Whether they end up a detransitioned, highly feminine cis man, or whether they end up a trans man who does drag, or a trans woman who likes mud and working on cars, or they go back to being a cis dude who wears a suit. I don't care, because that is freedom. I don't need you guys to retain every detail about every logical refutation of the onslaught of misinformation that we get from people like Dawkins and Harris. But I need you to learn enough so that when they say we are mutilating children, you can say, I know that's not. I need you to learn enough so that when they say trans people are rewriting biology, you can say, I know that's not happening. I need you to learn enough so when they say it's our fault that the Democrats lost this last November, to an adjudicated rapist and defender of human traffickers, you can say, I know that's not happening. Because trans people are your allies in the fight against Christian nationalism. Trans people are the ones fighting for your right to be outwardly whoever you are. And because trans people deserve more than basic dignity. Trans people deserve to be loved. Trans people deserve to succeed. Trans people deserve to win medals. And trans people deserve the opportunity to thrive. All right, I know that was 30 minutes out of our 15-minute time window, so if you guys have some questions, we can maybe do like some Q&A stuff. Yeah, go for it.
You make me think of a very important question, although this question is probably better for Dr. Ben. My son is pretty sure that he has endometriosis. His older sister had endometriosis, and he has the exact same symptoms. And she was cured by taking birth control pills. But my son does not want to take birth control pills because my son does not want female hormones.
Sure.
So my son is afraid to go see an OBGYN. What should he do?
Yeah, that was really a Dr. Ben question.
Jump in for it.
Yeah, that is the doctor question.
It's complicated. We can talk offline.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions or maybe anything you've encountered like in these kind of discussions that you're like, I really don't know how to respond to
I
that?
just really admire your motto
Me too.
for being able to see beyond everything. And granted, you went through so much yourself. And I appreciate it. So, like I said, great, as she was. She loved you so much
I was very, very fortunate. I mean,
that was so unusual. So,
especially in the area I grew up. When I actually got my name changed on my birth certificate, it was the first time anyone in my county had gotten a name and gender change for those reasons. And so, like, genuinely nobody had
so
really encountered the concept before, and my mom was outstanding. I mean,
for all the bad that you went through, look at the good. You're
Absolutely.
preaching to yourself and to us. So,
thank you.
you're
I mean, I guess I can let you guys go early if you want. Any other thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
I have some friends in Germany, and their child is 16 years old, and he wants to have gender affirming care to be male, and he's getting therapy and everything is going through, but I'd like to know better, I guess, how to support the parents. The mom is really concerned about the health issues of being 16 and starting hormone therapy. And I can talk a bit about that offline, but I guess it was hard for me. I tried to be supportive of everybody in the family, like one at a time, you know?
Mhm.
But when I was there visiting them, but I think the mother has the same kind of feelings about, she's like, well, have you even done the research? So, you know, there could be problems, and do you know what those problems are? So,
Well, I think the thing about that is you should really rely on trusting your medical provider, right? I feel like these should be discussions that you're having in conjunction with a medical provider, not internally in your mind panicking and Googling. Googling is great, definitely, you know, do the research that you can, but like these medications have been used for cisgender kids for decades and decades and decades. We are very well aware of all the risks, what mitigating factors we need to take. There are well-established standards of care for trans kids accessing these medications. So to the extent that there are some risks, as there are all medications, they've been well understood, and a good provider is going to be regularly looking at their levels to make sure that everything's where it's supposed to be, to make sure that any potential risks are being mitigated and caught. So
yeah.
it definitely, just taking the medication shouldn't be scary. It should be, if you're like buying off the black market and like overdosing, then maybe there's a risk of concern, you know?
Yeah, it seems that what the child needs is more trust and feel. That's just my perception of the situation from the mom, you know, like you not trusting when you're talking about your internal experience. That's what hit me about it.
Yeah, there's some good research that even suggests that like kids have a really well-established sense of identity as young as like 3 and 4. So like 16, you very well established your sense of self by that point. At least that domain. Like obviously I think we've all had our probably little crises of like something we got into for a few years and then we look back and we're like, oh my god, that was so cringe. But gender doesn't tend to be one of those things. That tends to be a little bit more of a stable concept.
I do have
most
to
people's life.
say though that when I was like 3.5 or 4 years old, I told my brothers I was going to turn into a boy, and they were like, "No, you're not. Look at mom." I was like, I thought I was going to turn into a boy because I had 2 older brothers, and that they turned into boys, and they got to do all the fun stuff, and I didn't get to do. But that was, you know, but that was not my experience. Once I figured that out. Yeah, what's up?
What are some good resources? So let's say we've got a friend that comes to us, and we're just about a teenager or something like that. Before they Google and find every possible answer, are there good websites to send them to? What's the sense to do?
Yeah, I know Americans for Transgender Equality, A14E, is an organization that's doing a lot of great work, and I'm pretty sure they have a resource page that's good for stuff like that. So that is an organization that I would probably jump to for new parents. But I mean, as like a research kind of person, I love reading like research papers. Like there's some pathways down there you could go, but it's probably not worth it for like just a parent encounter to kind of get. I would say organizations like A14E that are doing that work for broader understanding for like families and stuff, that's where I find that person.
Guarantee flag with chapters all over the place.
That's true.
Yep.
I don't know if I can word this properly. That was an awesome talk, by the way. I have a transgender child,
Sure.
who's 20. But I have always like been pretty open-minded about sexuality being kind of on a spectrum, and some people are far on one side or the other. And with my own child, like I always just saw it as a spectrum. And I used to say, why do we have to have labels for everything? Can't someone that looks like this and has this genital wear that? And like, what's a man look like? I don't know. Like I always had a crush on the guy from Rocky Horror Picture Show, the lingerie. And I was a little kid. I was like, is that a girl or a boy? I don't know. You know. And so then I was always in that idea of like, let's just get rid of labels. And then when the trans movement was coming, it was very much about the labels. And I talked to my kid about it, and I said, do we need the labels though? And my kid said, for some people, those labels are very new. And so it was like, I was just interested, because then there's like bathrooms. Like, are we eventually just gonna not have to deal with label bathrooms? Isn't it kind of funny that it's like, what genital do you have? That's the door you go in. Like, it's just, the whole thing seems like a slippery slope. Anyway.
Sure. I think in my view, labels have like kind of 2 main functions. One is you can communicate a general picture idea to somebody really quick, right? Like if I say like I'm bisexual, I would probably get specific, like I'm pansexual, like I'm parts or full parts for me is kind of my thing. So like I could get those labels, but I can also go broad and say bisexual. So like that just communicates general information, but it also doesn't mean the same thing to any 2 people. So there's always more questions. The other element of labels that I think is really important is kind of helping us understand like shared oppression. Like when we could talk about trans people having an experience of oppression that is very similar across the board, and being able to understand like trans women as a group, I think allows us to kind of tackle these problems and their sources and sort of who our like our oppressors are a lot more effectively when we're able to address like where is this group coming from, who is enacting these things upon us. So I think those to me are what I see these utility labels. Obviously they are important to some people individually, but I'm kind of with you in the sense that like I don't really care if I'm actually a woman. It's so stupid. Like my experience in the world seems to be as a woman. Like when I am going to like these like for my small business, these events, right? People will talk to my partner even though I run the operation. Like when I am trying to lift stuff at like Tractor Supply Co, like these 40-pound bags are not that heavy. How often guys will like come running out and be like, "I've got it, ma'am." Like, regardless of whether I'm actually a woman, I think I'm experiencing like sexism and experiencing the world as women do. So it's like, I get what you're saying. Labels have their utility and their function, but I think it's also good to understand that like, at the end of the day, we're all just people. Nobody is, we're all kind of unique in our way. So, yeah. Well, yeah.
I have a question. The propagandists like to bring up those who have transitioned and have regretted it. Have you ever encountered anyone that's
Oh yeah, all the time.
no, anyone who's transitioned and regretted it? Do they even exist?
So-
I'm sure of you, maybe tiny.
I mean,
But have you
mostly
ever
be
encountered that? And what do you think?
I think, so the thing is, we live in the age of the internet, there is always gonna be somebody who fits any description you can come up with. There are some people for sure who sincerely regret transition. I have met many detransitioners, and in my experience, overwhelmingly, like 99% of them, and this may just be my experience, maybe I have a very biased sample. I don't think so, the data seems to corroborate this. They don't kind of just go, "Wow, I regret it, let me go back to being a gender conforming traditional woman." Usually they're like, "I don't fucking care what I am anymore. Like, I'm just gonna be me, whatever you want to, when you think I'm a man, you think I'm a woman, sure, that's fine, I don't care." That's most of the people I know who detransition, that's kind of the lane that they take. But the data that I've seen.
Do they take the easier road than you think? Is that sort of their decision to just, they want to live their life and just leave me alone?
I think they get sick of defending who they are and trying to explain it to other people and just kind of say, "I'm just trying to live my life." At the end of the day, what box you decide to put me in is not my business, and I'm just trying to, live my life. But the data seems that there was a study from 2015, and I know they've done an updated version of it that hasn't been released yet, back in like 2022. And that was where they asked people like, "Have you ever detransitioned?" And it was, I think like 6% of the community had said at some point they had detransitioned, but of that, only 0.3% of the total sample said they detransitioned because they actually regretted it. All the other people who detransitioned said they did so for stories like mine. They were like, "I was abused, I lost my job, I got kicked out of my house or something," and so they were like, it just wasn't worth committing to it at that point in time, that they would later go on to transition again when they have the environment to do it. So that tends to be what the data seem to suggest. But yeah, there are those people out there for sure. They fly 2 of them around to states to testify at hearings for bills all the time. Look at Chloe Cole, and I forget who the other one is, but Chloe Cole is one that she's paid by like it's not CPAC, but it's one of the Heritage Foundation, I think it is, to fly and testify at all these things around the country. So. Yeah.
So I do see some content creators in here, so my question is twofold. First, what can non-trans cis content creators do to help with transphobia in this community? And the second part is, what can non-creators do who, participate in the secular space that in this community? What can they do to try to help with this transphobia problem? Because it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, for one, not being afraid to address it. I realize a lot of people are conflict averse. A lot of people are conflict averse and don't want to like pick a fight or whatever.
Yeah.
But you also have to realize that the emotional labor for cis people engaging this conversation is like 1/100th of what it is for a trans person. And so having cis people who are able to say something, and you don't even have to necessarily know everything or get it right, but just be able to be like, you know, why do you care about this issue? Does this actually impact you? Like being able to kind of diffuse the tension there, I think is really good for non-creators. As for creators, I don't know that there is a like rubber stamp solution. I personally like mockery, like you know, let's look at these ideas and think about like how serious should we really be taking this? Like again, we're looking at like the idea that any of this protects women and girls,
Yeah.
like
This is now.
like if you go like the UN had a website, I think before Trump's administration nuked some of that information on there that was about like the issues facing women. Trans people did not appear out of like the 50 issues they listed, right? Like there's so many things we know that are happening that can be addressed and demand real solutions from people. Like I think whenever they bring this stuff up to be like, oh, you care about women and girls, great. I'm so looking forward to seeing like, you know, your panel on, you know, whatever, like any number of issues that are kind of in that domain. So that's kind of what I would like to see more cis people do. I was gonna like, if you guys watch online, I love that Forrest is relentless when people are weird about pronouns. Because when I'm hosting a show, I feel like I have to be a lot more friendly to people. I want them to be welcomed into a conversation to kind of meet them where they're at. But I love when my cis co-hosts are like gonna be relentless about it because I can't do that in my activism. So it's nice to see somebody who can and doesn't have to pay the same cost for it, you know.
John does that on TikTok. The first question he asks, because on TikTok you have to be 18, right? So the first
Yeah.
question he asks is how old are you? The second question he asks is what are your pronouns? And if someone cannot figure out how to give pronouns, they don't get to participate in the call.
And they always know what they need to say, but they always have to be like, I'm a man.
Yeah.
Okay, what are your pronouns? Well, I'm a man. Okay, bro, what are your fucking pronouns? Like, you know what I'm asking you. Just stop being weird. Yeah.
Some people out of prayer listen.
2 minutes. All right, I think we're good. So, thank you guys. You have a question?
Yeah, it'd sound like an old, 70-year-old white-haired guy. You mentioned the person who's sent around the United States to testify.
Yeah.
And I know that you also mentioned that there is a good protocol in place already in the federal community. Is there any place at all in addressing transgender treatment that should have any legislation whatsoever? Or should it always be absolutely free?
Well, I don't know if there's any restrictive legislation that should be introduced because the thing that's frustrating for me is pre like 2012, it was far more restrictive. This was back when we had the DSM-4, what was called the Harry Benjamin standards. That's what I was talking about when I had seen endocrinologists, right? Activists fought hard to establish what are the standards of care that are going to make things safe and accessible and not provide unnecessary hoops, right? That's what got us to the model we were in now, where people were evaluating that with like facts and evidence and presenting that to politicians who aren't wrapped up in Donald Trump's like lie circus that is going on now. But now they're like trying to pretend that we have never enforced gender rules or gender transition laws at all, and so we need to introduce this stuff because it just doesn't exist. It's the Wild West. But it's the total opposite. It used to be chaotic in the Wild West and restrictive, and now we introduce good streamlined systems. So I don't think any more restrictive laws need to be introduced. I will say though, if they can produce an actual good body of evidence that suggests like waiting until 18 provides better outcomes, I'm open to that conversation. But all they ever do is say, well, the evidence isn't good enough for me, so therefore we should prevent access to it. And like that's not how we do science, you know.
Do you have any idea as to how much money the detransition grift makes? So that I can tell people, look, every trans person in the country could pretend to be not trans and make $1 million. I think there may be their gender.
That I don't have that much burden. But thank you guys. Yeah, thank you all.